Officially welcome to the third Erno Lehtinen online colloquium, and we have a pleasure to have a presenter, Professor Elsbeth Stern, today to talk about intelligence and the effects of education and possibilities of the impacts, how they would be going. I'm first going to tell you what's going to happen in this online event. So the schedule will be such that first there will be a short introduction, and then Elsbeth will give us about 45-minute presentation, and then Elsbeth and Erno will reflect on the topic together, and then there will be a possibility for Zoom breakout rooms when we can talk in small groups about a topic, about a question that Elsbeth has chosen. And now I have a special request for you. If you are busy today and if you would wish to skip the small group discussion part in breakout rooms, that would be the moment. I will let you know like when that moment is, so that you can jump out and don't miss much about the actual topics. We will only kind of have discussion and little wrap up in the end. So, but that would be nice if you could jump out then if you are not actively participating in the discussions, because, well, we noticed the first time that if you're just silent there or you're in the session, the breakout rooms will be shared so that there are suddenly empty rooms. So this is the style that seems to be working. Last time it was really nice, actually. The discussions were lively and very nice. So then we have an ending in the end. And I think depending on how the schedule will be or how the discussions will be going, like we might be doing it also so that we will leave the breakout rooms open. So if there are dear colleagues that you meet now since very long time and you would like to chat with them or something, that we can leave it open in the end. That's another possibility, but we will be flexible now. So we have had already two fantastic presentations and very nice reflections. We had Liebenverschaffel and Roger Sellier, and today it's Elsbeth's turn, and then we have lined up quite a few others to come. Now, I would like to introduce Elsbeth, our dear colleague and kind of very helpful, significant collaborator for us. There's a tradition actually that we have been presenting I have been introducing these speakers in numbers and in words. So this is the number part now. Like, she has amazing number of citations in Scopus and a nice number of articles, and imagine you yourself having already more than 50 co-authors. And she's been working in different universities, originally in Germany, and now she's in Switzerland. And then I'd like to introduce her as in words. And the first word starts with E, and that's Elsie. I happen to learn that her nickname given by her dear husband Ralph is Elsie, and it happened once in a lifetime that we had a problem that when we had our Vaakku, this guy, our bird, we call him Vaakku in Finnish, and that doesn't sound like a good name for a bird in German or in English or Spanish or Hebrew or something. So we had to kind of find a nice name for the bird. And so I called to Roland Grabner and asked, like, can you find a German nice name for this bird? And then he thought, like, well, there's this famous and fantastic professor that happens to be his boss, and her nickname is Elsie. And because Elsbeth was actually the first one who gave me as a PhD student, very, very helpful feedback concerning actually intelligence and controlling for that when we were measuring our first we were using our first SWON measures, and then I thought like this is a perfect one. So that's why Vaku is Elsie in German, in English, in Spanish, and in Hebrew. We have a very nice event today with Elsie, the first one. When I think of Elsbeth, I think laughing is a word that I would like to use. Like every time we meet, she has some nice jokes. She enjoys jokes and also likes to tell jokes. So laughing is something that is very present when we have been interacting. She, as you will be hearing from today's presentation, she is very optimistic in terms of like what kind of effects education can have and how important impacts education can have. And then I actually contacted Roland Grabner again and asked like, how is she as a boss? And he told that Elsbeth is confident as a boss and a very nice one. So welcome, Elsbeth, and dear regards from your previous co-workers in Zurich. And now it would be time for you to present about intelligence and start your presentation. And then I will let you know when the breakout room activity is about to start. Floor is yours. I stop the sharing now.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Minna, for this nice presentation. I hope I look a little bit different than this bird looks, but nonetheless, it's a nice one. And of course, a warm welcome also to Erno. I think we know each other for almost 25 years or so. We had collaboration. He often was in Zurich as a guest professor. So it's really my great honor to give this presentation in this very nicely organized symposium. When I thought what topic to focus on, of course, we both share research on learning mathematics, but I thought probably I should bring in a little bit a different aspect because so kind of contrasting cases a little bit. I am a psychologist by education, and before I went into educational research, I had a tradition in differential psychology, intelligence research, in Hamburg, and so on. Therefore, this line of research is still something I try to follow, and I also try to integrate it into educational research. So I thought I talk just about a kind of old-fashioned topic, and that is intelligence and the measurement of intelligence. I, of course, know that it's discussed very controversially. In the United States, I have colleagues who don't dare to touch the topic because it's no longer PC, but I'm not sure whether this is a good thing to follow on PC, given what has been happening today. But anyhow, I think it's important to keep in mind individual differences when it comes to cognitive abilities of human beings. What makes human beings unique? It's of course, as I said, they developed a lot of technical devices. They changed the world tremendously. It doesn't work very well. Human beings developed the world. They developed technical devices. Also, they have a brain that has been developed, at least the architecture of the brain, more than 40,000 years ago. And in the meantime, human beings developed a lot of ideas, concepts, and so on. They, all the things that are now a part of the curriculum, they only have been developed in the past centuries. And nonetheless, human beings, young children can learn these things. They can learn Arabic numbers, they can learn analytic geometry. Within few years, also they had been developed by genius minds over a long period of time. And we can do this, of course, because not only we have such wonderful brains, but because we also have developed cultural tools that help us to develop ideas and to develop ideas that are not just part of our genetic structure, but that were combined as in the course of development. Cultural progress is mainly, of course, depends on simple systems such as reasoning tools. And we know, of course, very intelligent people from the Roman Empire wouldn't have been able to solve this problem, while normally gifted elementary school children are able to solve the other problem. And this is not because they have different minds, but really because the cultural tools have changed. And I also would like to go back a little bit to kind of research I did when I was in Berlin, so it's more than 20 years ago, but also at that time, Erno and I had a close exchange. At this time, I supervised a PhD student. Unfortunately, she didn't stay in academia, although she was one of my most intelligent ones, Katja Bödecker, who wanted to see how people who didn't learn to read and to write, how they are dealing with certain kind of problems. There are still some remote tribes like on Trobriand Island where we have illiterate communities. They neither have scripts nor do they have tools like scales. And we compared them to elementary school children in Berlin. Berlin has never been famous for good school achievement, so we had a really good control group. Katja asked the people questions like this. So she went there with a lot of material, with cotton wool, for instance, and with an iron bowl. And she asked, do you think it is possible to accumulate an amount of cotton wool that weighs as much as this iron bowl? Or does the weight of wet clay change if the form changes? Or do you think it is possible to produce a wooden bowl that is as heavy as this iron bowl? Of course, these are very easy questions for elementary school children. And you see in Berlin, 5th graders didn't have any difficulties. And also people from Trobriand who underwent an elementary education, there were some people who did this, they almost answered the questions correctly in our sense. But illiterate adults from Trobriand, they answered very different from what we would expect. So this really shows that, that we need cultural tools, that we need number systems, that we need scales, that we need script in order to reason the way which is now taken for granted, of course, in all our societies. This is very important to emphasize that it were the cultural tools that made us smart. But of course, human beings, we know it very well, differ considerably the extent they make use of educational opportunities. The question, of course, of equity, equality, welfare, that we know that not all students live up to the expectations and not all undergo the education that probably would fit their cognitive profile. Of course, individual differences in learning capacity challenge school systems, they challenge schools, and they challenge teachers. This is, of course, a very famous picture. All of you may know that in living beings bring different preconditions, and if we ask them to fulfill the same tasks, they end up very differently. So what I would like to talk about is intelligence research, because there has been a long tradition in educational psychology where intelligence research played a major role. But nowadays, educational psychology and differential psychology or intelligence research are kinds of estranged siblings. While educational psychology doesn't really consider the complex interaction between instruction and quality, intelligence and learning outcomes. I would like to go a little bit back into the history and explain how it was in the beginning and probably why it changed. And of course, you remember, of course, you all know intelligence tests. This is we have a long tradition, and I still would say that the most serious and solid thing psychology produced was intelligence research. It were intelligence tests. Also, we still do not know exactly what intelligence is. We know quite well how to measure it, and we can use these tests to predict not only educational outcome, but also to predict a lot of school, to a large extent, school achievement, and many, many other things as we know nowadays. Yeah, the performance differences in intelligence can, of course, be traced back to genetic differences. Nobody would call this into questions. They are good predictors of life success, and they are the best predictors of future learning outcomes at all age levels. And sometimes this is even beyond prior knowledge. Of course, whenever prior knowledge comes into play, usually you can better predict future learning. But, and I would now like to draw your attention to a recently published paper where also Roland Grabner, my long-term collaborator, was involved. We had been working on chess, which was considered the Drosophila of cognitive psychology. And in former times, we could show that prior knowledge predicted best achievement in chess, the ELO number or whatever. But in the long term, we found in the meantime that there is an extra contribution of intelligence. That means if the number of hours of practice is held constant, intelligence still can explain some differences. Yeah, performance, as I said already, and performance in intelligence tests even explain differences in learning outcomes at the upper end. There was for a long time the idea that there would be a threshold. That means once one has reached an intelligence quotient of 120, does no longer matter. In the meantime, there are tons of data which show this is not the case. And together with my postdoc, Michael Berkowitz, we could show that this is, for instance, also for students at our university who are enrolled in mathematics or in engineering programs. And these are almost very intelligent students. We also applied intelligence tests, but we found that intelligence can explain differences in the final exams to a certain extent. So it really makes a difference of whether a student is on percentile range 98 or 99. It makes a big difference. So intelligence tests are predictive. The reason is, of course, why did they become estranged siblings? They have common roots, but there were a lot of reasons for growing apart. One, of course, is that they were invented, particularly for special education. In later times, they were also used particularly in the United Kingdom for regulating the admission to grammar schools, the so-called tripartite educational system, which has been abolished in the 70s, while in Central Europe we still have the system. And of course, in the meantime, a lot of more specific tests have been developed. For instance, the SIT, this university admission tests, which are a kind of crystallized intelligence tests. They measure how students use the kind of knowledge they acquired at school in a most intelligent way. And of course, these tests measure partly intelligence, but only for those who got the opportunity, who really got a good education. And intelligence tests were validated against school achievement when found, and there were a lot of famous intelligence researchers, Carol Kronbach, for instance, who started as educational psychologists. So probably why did both lines of research grow apart? Of course, intelligence tests lost some of their impact on educational decisions. The idea was, of course, inclusion of separate schools for children with special needs. Nowadays, yeah, you have less and less schools with school now, and in Finland, it's a role model for the whole world for having a very good comprehensive school system. And in other countries, they do not work as well as in Finland, but nonetheless, they now have also comprehensive schools. And of course, many continental European countries like Switzerland and Germany and Austria, they still have tracked school systems, but decisions have never been based on intelligence scores. They have always, or other standardized tests, they have always based on school grades and teacher evaluation. And inspired, of course, by intelligence tests, standardized tests, achievement tests for core school subjects were developed, such as the 11 plus test in the UK, which is, of course, no longer used for selection, but it's still used for monitoring the educational system. And of course, the focus of research also changed tremendously in educational psychology. We try to explain increases of mean scores rather than within group variance. And we want to trace back increases in mean scores, of course, to educational interventions, classroom practice, school policy, or whatever. Yeah, and the cognitive perspective has changed a little bit. The role of knowledge in learning has been emphasized, and also, of course, many other characteristics such as motivation and self-concept. While intelligence research was always interested in explaining variance and explaining how can intelligence test differences be traced back to certain characteristics of information processing, and looking for the neural correlates of intelligence was a big effort, and estimating the genetic variance and all these things. Therefore, the focus of research really changed in both areas. And I still think it's a pity that both areas grew apart. There have, of course, also been some serious attempts to undermine collaboration between both fields. One is, of course, that intelligence was, a lot of people didn't like intelligence research because of, it's a little bit challenging to emphasize that people are equipped with different mental resources. And others overestimated the malleability of intelligence. Just to show you some some books and some words like emotional intelligence, which I think is not a very serious and solid line of research, not because emotions are unimportant, but because you can't measure emotional competencies to the same extent you can measure cognitive psychology. And of course, Howard Gardner he's very famous. We just love his books, but they are rarely ever really really backed by serious empirical findings, because this multiple intelligence concept has never been proven by empirical research. Others had quite important publication who emphasized that whatever may sometimes explain learning outcomes better than intelligence. And of course, these are very serious and sound findings. I would never call them into question. But the question is really how much can they be generalized? How much are they dependent, first on the sample they were gained, and second, of course, on the kind of problems or content areas that were considered. On the one hand, these studies considered mostly middle-class samples, and therefore the correlations with intelligence are always lower because of the restricted range in intelligence. And most of these studies focused on areas in mathematics that are not very challenging for intelligent, more or less intelligent learners, at least those who are above average. They considered fractions, percentage, and calculation, and all these things which can be easily understood if you really invest a little bit of time by students who, even if they only have an average intelligence. Therefore, I would never say that intelligence doesn't matter derived from these studies, but that in a certain range of samples and in a certain range of problems, intelligence doesn't play a big role because there is not so much variance in intelligence, and because the topic to be learned is not too challenging for average people in intelligence. And moreover, for these topics like fractions, percentage, calculation, and so on, there are many learning opportunities outside school that can compensate for deficits in school instruction. And there may also probably a social background effect may come in. Yeah, and I would not, as I already said, I would never call into question that motivation and self-discipline and grit or whatever these authors consider, they are important for investigating intelligence, for investing intelligence into achievement, but they cannot compensate for deficits in intelligence. It doesn't really mean that with a low intelligence score, you would easily be able to learn everything you would like to learn. So, and of course, also this motivation is quite malleable. You can change it easily. While you can change your intelligence to the same extent. This is not always taken seriously. There are highly esteemed researchers like Carol Dweck. She got a lot of support, money, and whatever, but she that intelligence is as malleable as other characteristics like motivation, which is just not the case if one really would take intelligence research seriously. But you can read the citation where she thinks it's otherwise. In the meantime, of course, we know that genes play a big role in explaining intelligence differences, but at the same time, of course, we don't have this old-fashioned discussion of nature versus nurture any longer. We have the discussion on nature via nurture. This means that genetic is not unalterable, but rather genetic means that there is a certain framework where nature can come into play. And of course, it's the interaction of nature and nurture that produces the intelligence a person has during her life. We know, of course, from many research areas, but it's always taken very seriously from others, that one can't just boost one's intelligence by brain shocking or however you call it. You can, of course, increase a score in a certain test, but you can't boost your intelligence in the sense of learning ability. So if you would do brain shocking, you would become better in tests that are quite similar to the tests you practiced, but it will not be easier for you to understand algebra or calculus or whatever afterwards, because it was just a kind of inflation of certain test scores, but it didn't change really the cognitive abilities. There is, of course, a complex interaction between instructional quality, intelligence, and learning outcomes. And I would emphasize in the second part of my talk a little bit on this. There is another very famous person, unfortunately he didn't become very old, Richard Snow, who had one very famous citation psychology now recognizes intelligence as education's most important product, as well as its most important raw material. And in the rest of my talk, I would emphasize first on product and then on raw material, because we know school is extremely schooling, learning to read and to write, learning mathematics. It's extremely important for developing what we call intelligence. First, intelligence as education's product. We know that higher cognitive competences, as they are measured in intelligence tests, in verbal as well as non-verbal ones, require schooling for the genetic potential to display. And we also know that the IQ only stabilizes during the course of elementary school. It's not stable in the preschool time. There is a correlation, but it's too low to really allow long-term prediction. But as soon as students come to school, as soon as they learn to read, to write, and mathematics, in the first 2 years, sometimes 3 years, the results are a little bit different. They develop a kind of intelligence score that, of course, is not. There is, of course, some variability, but it is relatively stable. This means you can't have an IQ on the one day of 100 and on the next day of 130. And we also have a lot of findings which show that quantitative and qualitative aspects of school education can boost IQ by some points. Sometimes we use this tracking school system as it is in Germany, also in Switzerland, and it's always found that students who started with the same intelligence, but one went to the normal secondary school, to the standard school, the other went to the higher track, to the gymnasium. After 3 or 4 years, there are small differences, but significant ones between both students. So there is still, of course, room for development. And the question is, of course, how is intelligence in school? How is it the raw material? I tried to integrate cognitive psychology, differential psychology, and developmental psychology in this model. You can read it in open access journal. I had the chance to write an introduction on the difference in learning potential of human beings. And here you see how I try to integrate working memory, long-term memory, cognitive processes, as they are also formulated at learning goals in this. You can go into detail if you read this article, but it's very important that intelligence may come into play, of course, at every stage of human information processing. But there is one aspect which is probably most important, and that is, of course, it's really the working memory. But before I come to this, I would really emphasize that there is, of course, a correlation between intelligence and school achievement. It's about 0.50, a little bit higher sometimes, but there is a very big range from 0 to 0.77. 0.77 was found in a British study by Ian Deary, a differential psychologist with whom I have sometimes discussion, and he never takes into consideration school psychology and learning. He thinks it's all intelligence, but I always try to convince him that there is more to learning than intelligence anyhow. That it's always higher the correlation for achievement tests than for grades. It's clear because achievement tests have a better reliability. It's higher for mathematics than for other subjects. That may also be traced back to the higher reliability of mathematics tests. But the question is, of course, how does instruction alter educational outcome, and how can more intelligent students take advantage from instructional input? And here I would like to come back to working memory, because from intelligence research, we know that working memory, also we can't find it directly in the brain, but it's deeply rooted in the brain, is probably a kind of core of intelligence. One always finds relatively high correlations between working memory tests. I will show you some soon, and also intelligence tests. In my group, we also look for the correlation between working memory tests and achievement in mathematics, and we also find some relations. But this is ongoing research. We have now quite detailed models of working memory. We know we can only function as human beings in the way we are doing if we are able to follow goals, if we show goal-directed behavior. We have to update and reorganize our information. We have to integrate incoming information into existing knowledge. We have to switch goals, and we have, of course, we have to inhibit all the time irrelevant information. Otherwise, we couldn't focus on goals. Just showing you some tests that can measure working memory functions. I show you 3 words: house, cat, chair, car. It's easy to remember them, but it's not that easy to remember them if I tell you, please write down the words in the order of the physical size of the object they dominate. So this is really a difference. Or the task switch task, very easy task. You see a figure on the screen. It's either a rectangle or a circle. Some are blue, some are red, and you get the instruction, please press the key for red object. Very easy. But when the instruction changes into press key for circles, then it becomes quite difficult, because now you have to suppress the pressing of the key. For some objects you had to press before, and for others you have to press and this is what makes really learning difficult. But a lot of tasks we have to undergo in academic learning, when we are reading tests, when we are solving word problems, mathematical word problems, we have first process information. We learn something about money a person has, or how many rabbits are in the garden, or whatever. But you soon should forget about the concrete situation, because one has to go to the mathematical model. So it's very important to suppress information as soon as the task is clear. Otherwise, you probably would forget what the information was about when you end up at the question, for instance, at a mathematical word problem. So therefore, working memory functions are very important for academic learning, and we human beings function the way we do because we have this mysterious working memory. We know also they improve continuously during childhood. There is also a lot of evidence, really supporting evidence from neuroscience. It's very closely connected with the development of the frontal cortex. And they are sources of individual differences in cognitive capabilities. I already said there is a relatively high correlation between intelligence and working memory tests. Also, we can substitute intelligence tests by working memory tests, because the working memory tests are less reliable. So I wouldn't suggest to do this. But working memory functions support an intelligence knowledge representation, as I would call it, which is usable, of course, for all kinds of reasoning. For instance, I don't know whether you know what is Saola. If you don't know it, it's no problem. Very few people know it. But it's a Vietnamese antelope. So you still don't know how Saola looks like. But now, if you're an intelligent person who uses her working memory functions and tries to connect incoming information with given knowledge, you know already a lot of this animal. You know it's a vertebrate, ruminant, mammal. You know eat plants, has fur, produce milk for feeding offspring or whatever. You don't know, of course, the size. you don't know whether it's first is black, brown or so, because yeah, antelope can differ a lot, yeah, in these characteristics, but not in others. So this is how it looks like. So this is, of course, what makes us intelligent, that when we hear a word, yeah, already, or hear category, can infer a lot of information. Or yeah, when it comes to relational concepts, most of concepts in academia are relational contexts, not direct characteristics. For instance, here we have quite easy concept that's also well known almost to everybody, the concept of a cousin. You never know, yeah, who is a cousin if you only see these 4 boys. You have to know about their relationship and their relatives in order to see whether somebody is a cousin or is not a cousin. And here we have a lot of other examples, yeah, where we really have to consider relations rather than direct characteristics. So most of the scientific concepts are relational ones. They get their meaning from the context they are embedded in. For instance, does grass have calories? Yes, for ruminants, of course, no, for carnivores. Evolution, there are a lot of misconceptions when it comes to the biological concept of evolution. Yeah, it's exactly that selection and the adaptation depend on the interaction between individuals and the environment. It's not just the survival of the strongest, as some people think. We really have to consider the relation between environment and an individual's characteristics. And of course, we have thousands of studies which show that how difficult it is to understand physical concepts like force or pressure or whatever, because they can only be understood if one has a view of a relation and a system. In mathematics, of course, it's also well known that as soon as we leave the field of whole numbers, we have to give up some ideas that bigger numbers always characterize bigger quantities. If you have fractions and decimals, you have to consider the position of a number, and only then you can infer yeah, what the size of the quantity referred to. So I would like to summarize. There are big differences in intelligence. They emerge from the interaction between individuals' genetic resources and environmental stimulations and affordances. An individual's intelligence is less malleable than many other personality characteristics. It's quite fixed, whether one likes it or not. However, the quality of instruction has a big impact on the investment of intelligence into knowledge and competences. We know, particularly in physics and in mathematics, there are a lot of underachievers. That means students who are quite intelligent, they score quite high whenever you present them a standardized intelligence test, but they completely fail in mathematics and physics, and this is really can be traced back to yeah, an instruction that doesn't work the way the teacher hoped it would. You know, of course, nowadays a lot of how to better teach physics and mathematics so that intelligent students really yeah, get interested into it and use their capabilities, but it's not as widespread as it could be, probably. I very much like what Sandras Carr once said, that nature explains variance while nurture explains the means. As I said already in the beginning, yeah, this is why these two fields of research grew apart. But of course, we have to consider the mean increase as well as the variance. And successful teaching means that the mean increases, but we have to be aware that there will always be individual differences in the extent to which one can gain from learning environments. Thank you for your attention, and many, many more productive years for Erno. Thanks.
So, thank you very much, Elsbeth. It was a very rich presentation, and and I know that you also made it in this way, that it's partly challenging the beliefs typically people nowadays have, and on the other side you in a way framed the claims with kind of within the theoretical thinking and also empirical results in a way that force people, also those who don't like intelligence so much, to think about them more deeper. Thank you very much. I think this is very important, particularly because nowadays it seems that there are quite many people in education and educational psychology who completely deny the concept of intelligence and try to avoid it. And then on the other side, we have those people coming from genetics and some from differential psychology, who say that that kind of genes are everything, intelligence is everything, and as you also referred to that English guy, that education doesn't matter. And I believe that neither of these extreme views is very fruitful if we think that what research can contribute for the society or for education. But then there are interesting questions in that we have to think about. We could start with this general question that what could be the consequences for educational system. You referred to the different models. There are the comprehensive school models, which try to do the education so good as possible for everybody without tracking. And then we have the tracking systems, and particularly in Europe, they do not use intelligence testing there, but prior achievement in earlier school levels. And then we have the models, maybe the Anglo-Saxon models, where they have stronger emphasis on intelligence testing in these models. So what is your opinion that is it wise to use intelligence testing in grouping students?
Yeah. Of course, this is a question I'm asked quite frequently because I give a lot of talks where I really show that tracking, neither in Germany, where about 40% of the students go to the gymnasium, nor in Switzerland, where only 20% go to the gymnasium, really works well. There is a big overlap. That means there are very intelligent students who don't go to the gymnasium, and there are less intelligent students, sometimes they have quite low score, go to the gymnasium. I have now a lot of data, and we of course see a big social background effect. That means if you have an intelligence a little bit above average and you come from a low SAS family, your chances are almost zero to go to the gymnasium. If you come from a family who has, where the parents already went to university, your chances are quite high. That means really intelligence is not the major variable that decides who goes to the gymnasium. And the question, of course, is, should we apply intelligence tests? I say not at all. In a way, it has been done in former times, because we know one can practice intelligence tests. And in this case, of course, parents who have the money and the background, they would send their kids to the psychologists to practice intelligence tests with them, and so they would be again this problem. But nonetheless, I think intelligence tests should be applied in case there is a conflict. If, for instance, I'd always tell teachers, if you have a student, you know probably the parents didn't go to the university, but he or she is much better in mathematics than in reading or writing, this could be an indicator that he or she is more intelligent than you would infer from school achievement. And in these cases of conflict, I would say yes, an intelligence test could be very helpful to see whether a student should go to the gymnasium or not. Or in the quite frequent case, when teachers think in Germany or in Switzerland, the kid isn't smart enough for the gymnasium, but the parents insist. Also in this case, I would say intelligence tests would be helpful, but I'm completely against group tests. In this case, a psychologist should have some individual tests, not only one, but several tests with the student, and then come up with a decision of whether higher education would be the right track or not. And of course, it's very important if a child shows poor school achievement, but nonetheless has quite good intelligence scores, it wouldn't be enough to send him or her to the gymnasium if he or she wouldn't get extra help. So therefore, I think intelligence tests should not be just the standard, and it shouldn't be the only test that is considered when it comes to these decisions, but they should come into play whenever there is a conflict between teachers, parents, or whatever.
Yes, and this is now, this argument was mainly focused on this educational system where there exists a early selection. The system they have in Germany or Switzerland, and then in other countries, it's of course the selection takes place much later, and then there are so many other aspects which have an influence when young people decide after long comprehensive education about their future.
I should say probably that this early selection we had, for instance, in Germany. Of course, from nowadays perspective, we think it's crazy. How can you decide at the age of 10 whether somebody should go to the university or not? It's really crazy. But in former times, when there was this golden age of social mobility, it was quite helpful because I know from the United States, or sometimes also from the UK, that you have this feeling that you are the first generation person going in your family going to the university. A little bit uncertain and so on. This was not the case, for instance, in Germany, when 10-year-old children already got an academic education because they brought the intelligence. So I think social mobility in the 60s and 70s, this early selection also contributed to social mobility, probably even more than it was the case in the UK and in the US. But of course, now that the boat is full, as we say, there is no way to increase the percentage of students going to the gymnasium in Germany, because almost half of them go. And in Switzerland, they also insist on the 20%. Now the social background comes so much into play.
Yes, that's interesting to look at that within a historical context.
So I always try to say that early selection also helped students who didn't get the support from their family to develop in the right sense for academic education.
Yes. But then if we think about a little bit more theoretical question, you didn't use the term of percentages, that how many percents of intelligence depends on genes and how many percentages are depending on the environment, education and what environment. But many people do that, and particularly people coming from have genetic background. They like to use this term. But now, if I understood correctly, even the more kind of modern theories of how genes have an influence, so that it's completely based on the interaction, so that the interaction with the environment makes the genes work. After this very deep interaction, does it make any sense to define the percentages?
No, I think that the percentages, they are an indicator of social justice, and this is of course this little bit counterintuitive result. The higher the percentage of intelligence differences one can trace back to genes, the more fair and the more equal is a society. We always find in Scandinavian countries, when we have twin studies, there is a higher percentage of genetic variants than, for instance, in the United States. Because a country is fair if everybody gets the chance to really make her genes to work, so gene expression. So I think this is very important. Having 100% being traced back to genetic differences would show this is a very fair country which helps to exploit everybody his or her genetic potential.
Yes, yes, on that argumentation level, so that we discuss, but if I think it theoretically, because the percentage refers to the thinking that genes independently of environment contribute so much, and then environment independently of genes contribute so much. But this doesn't make sense, in my opinion, from theoretical.
No, of course it doesn't make sense, because of course anyhow it's only the variance that is explained. But as I said, it's the environment really determines how much of the genetic potential can unfold itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But this is now the very important, let's say, message from your presentation, that what the environment can offer, what the education can offer, and there are so individual differences. Some differences go back to genes, some to early development, and then also later development still have an influence on the individual's capacity. But what is most important here, and I refer to the term optimistic, what Minna uses, is that in any case, it's important to pay attention to quality, the quality of education, what we offer for children and young people.
I fully agree, because as I said, the environment can really support to the increase of the mean wherever it, but the variance we have to be aware that very high quality environment doesn't reduce variance, it increases the mean. Of course, it will reduce variance when it comes to quite trivial things, but as we come to transfer tasks, as we come to use of knowledge in new contexts, we'll most likely find what we call a Matthew effect, or the rich get richer effect.
Yes, and then one detail in your discussion was this the new finding you presented about the effect of intelligence differences in the very hh level achievement. Because this has been very interesting discussion within the expertise research. So that when in the very top level of expertise, does the intelligence differences still matter? So that it's that there has been the theory that it matters in the earlier development, who is faster, who maybe even start the deliberate practice needed in certain area, but the role of intelligence is decreasing when after increasing the deliberate practice and increasing accumulated deliberate practice and increasing level of expertise. So have you been looking at with so extreme experts, or among, let's say, a little bit elite students, such as ETH students?
I would say, of course, I would say if you have really a quite narrow behavior in mind, or quite narrow area of expertise, of course, it works that at the beginning intelligence may play a role, but at the end there is no longer a difference. We found this more or less for taxi drivers, for instance, when they have to learn the map of their city. This was a time before we had all these GPS things. But as soon as it comes to the transfer, as soon as it comes to using knowledge in new contexts, then intelligence comes into play. Or also when it are quite complex competencies, such as it was the case for chess. Chess, of course, remains complex. Also, there is only a limited number of rules. Nonetheless, you can have endless numbers of moves. And here, as I said, we could really show that at the age of 70, when we, or at a higher age at least, when we looked at chess players where we had gained intelligence scores years ago, we found that the difference in the quality of chess playing could be partly at least traced back to intelligence differences. So as soon as it comes to complex knowledge areas or complex areas of expertise, and as soon as it comes to transfer to the application of knowledge in new contexts, then intelligence differences come again into play. And of course, we know from this famous study from Benbow and Trubinsky and so on, they even can explain differences on a much more selective level.
Yes. So we looked that in one of our studies in more kind of limited areas, so that we looked how this the visual abilities predict people in medicines, the people's skills to interpret medical images. And there we did find that in the beginning, the kind of more general differences in visual abilities had an impact on the learning speed, but on the upper level, this effect disappeared. And that's of course was in line with the general findings claimed by, for example, Ericsson's theoretical argumentation. But for sure, that this is an interesting question to continue.
Yeah, sure. We also have sometimes I have a study with architecture students. We just submitted for publication. We also found it a little bit in this direction, that at the beginning spatial abilities played a bigger role than at the end. And David Uttle has found similar results. This may really be that you have to you nonetheless have to develop your domain, or you have to develop spatial strategies that are really adapted to the content. So these general abilities don't help that much any longer. David Uttle found it for chemistry students, and we found it for architectures. But I still would say that spatial abilities is only really still under discussion how closely it's related to the general intelligence. By sure, it makes the smallest contribution, factor G. So I would consider, of course, it's an important ability, but it's not the core of intelligence, I would say.
Yes. Okay. But then one question you were dealing in the beginning of your presentation, which is the relationship between the domain-specific prior knowledge and then intelligence test results. So in our mathematics studies, we have quite many times experienced the same phenomenon, that when we just look at the correlation between, let's say, Raven results and then the math achievement we are predicting, we typically focus on these more advanced skills, these adaptive and flexible mathematical skills. They are correlating so that they are in a way predictor of the later mathematical development. But when we add in the models domain-specific predictors, then it's almost always this nonverbal intelligence measure disappears, so that it's not anymore significant predictor. So that happens quite often. Now the question is that what explain that? Is it so that the function of intelligence difference is already embedded in these
I would
mathematics measures, or what is your explanation for that?
We find this in almost all our studies to the same extent as you explain it. Prior knowledge almost always completely covers intelligence. And but I think this is mainly, of course, the case for areas, as I already said, in mathematics. Yeah, you often use algebra or fractions or whatever, where yeah, intelligent students have a lot of opportunities during the lifespan to yeah, use different learning opportunities, formal ones and informal ones. And this may really yeah, just explain that intelligence has been invested here completely in this domain-specific area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, of course, to the one, somehow it's a good, I'm not sure whether it's good or bad, because the question is, if everybody would have very good learning opportunities in mathematics, and we know, of course, they can differ a lot depending on the teacher, would we still find, if we really would have perfect learning opportunities, would we still find that intelligence doesn't explain anything more, particularly if we use outcome measures that are a little bit remote. That means that are not just measure what has been taught, but really are more transfer-like. So they measure really how to use the knowledge. I think this is very important to keep in mind, that most of the outcome measures yeah, just measure what has been taught, but the question is really yeah, what do people make of the knowledge when it has to be applied in new situations?
Yes.
And this might be a good moment now. Thank you. I would listen to you to the rest of the day and week. I think I love listening to your discussion. But now it would be time for the breakout activity. So I'm going to show you the question. Where does underachievement come from? So where does underachievement come from?
Yeah, I hope you all had very fruitful discussions now. Thank you, Elsbeth, for the excellent presentation. It was, yeah, exactly the kind of things that we're really happy to get to hear about in the ELOC. And thank you, Erno, for leading the discussion. Thank you, Minna, for setting this on track and getting this going. And thank you all for participating. Just to remind you all about the upcoming sessions, then in 2 weeks, we're going to have Douglas Clements and Julie Sarama, who are going to be talking, I guess, a lot about their early math interventions. And so we hope you're able to join us for that as well. Don't forget that the video of this will be available hopefully in the next week or so on the YouTubes, and hope you can find that useful in your teaching or in other aspects. So yeah, that's all for today, and yeah, thank you everyone again for joining.
Thank you. Dankeschön, Elsbeth.
Dankeschön.